She had just stepped out of the arrivals gate, beautiful and elegant in a designer suit, dragging an expensive suitcase. For Officer David O'Connell and Kevin Riley, two airport security police, the image evoked not admiration, but prejudiced suspicion and a lucrative opportunity to make money. Random checks. That was the perfect excuse. They stopped her. They scrutinized her papers. Then the insults began, directed at her skin color, at her wealthy appearance that they considered abnormal and illegitimate. When she dared to resist, to demand respect, they took action. Cold handcuffs clamped around her wrists in the middle of a crowded airport lobby, making her the center of curiosity and humiliation. And then, the brazen offer. $5,000 in cash in exchange for freedom. They were completely confident, thinking they had cornered their prey, that their greed and racism were about to be satisfied. But they had made a fatal mistake, an irreparable miscalculation. Little did they know that the woman they had just captured, insulted, and attempted to blackmail was no easy victim. Behind her stylish exterior was her true identity, an identity that would bring the world of these two corrupt cops to an utter collapse. The fateful call is about to be made. The curtain is about to fall. Listen to find out how the shocking truth is revealed and the price O'Connell and Riley will pay for their foolish actions. The International Arrivals Hall at Miami International Airport on a Friday afternoon in mid-July was as bustling and noisy as a multinational marketplace. The typical Florida humidity mixed with the scents of coffee, perfumes of all kinds, and the faint scent of sweat from the hustle and bustle of people dragging suitcases back and forth. The loudspeakers announced flights in English and Spanish, mixed with the clatter of suitcase wheels on polished marble floors, the cheerful chatter and sighs of relief from passengers finishing long flights. Among the crowd of people, Special Agent Lena Sterling stood out like a strange but attractive flower. She had just stepped out of Gate D25, where the first-class flight from London had just landed. At 34 years old, Lena possessed a sharp, modern beauty. Smooth caramel skin, large, intelligent eyes that shone with alertness, a straight nose and slightly curved lips that always exuded a discreet smile. Her thick, silky black hair was cut in a trendy shoulder-length bob, framing her delicate oval face. Her long, straight legs were accentuated by pointed nude Christian Louboutin heels. In one hand, she pulled a shiny silver aluminum Rimowa cabin suitcase, and on the other arm she held the legendary black crocodile Hermes Birkin handbag, an unmistakable symbol of wealth and class. Lena's entire appearance exuded elegance, neatness, and success, enough to attract any admiring or curious glance. Her demeanor was confident and calm, her steps graceful but decisive through the crowd. However, if you looked closely, you could see that her eyes were constantly scanning her surroundings. A keen observation, an assessment of the environment that had become instinctive after more than a decade of working for the FBI, specializing in complex cases involving financial crimes, money laundering, and international fraud. She had just finished a brief phone call on a wireless headset, her voice soft, using seemingly normal but actually code words to briefly report that she had landed safely and arranged transportation for Mr. Sterling, a metaphor for her confidential work to her superiors. Lena felt a mixture of relief and exhaustion. The nearly 2-week business trip to London had been intense, requiring intense concentration and mind games with the most powerful figures in the underground financial world. Now that she was back on American soil, even if only temporarily before flying back to headquarters in Washington, D.C., she felt a little better. However, the fatigue from the transatlantic flight was still there, hidden behind her light makeup and radiant appearance. She just wanted to quickly collect her checked luggage and leave this noisy airport to go to the hotel to rest. However, Lena's perfect appearance and obvious wealth unintentionally made her the target of unfriendly gazes. In a corner not far from gate D25, which had a panoramic view of the first class and business class passenger exits, two figures in airport security uniforms were leaning against the wall, appearing absent-minded but actually selectively observing the crowd. The older man, Officer David O'Connell, was in his late 50s, with short gray hair and a sagging face that looked tired, dissatisfied, and bored with his job. His gray-blue eyes scanned the crowd, not for signs of security irregularities, but like a predator looking for a juicy prey. Next to him was Officer Kevin Riley, a white young man in his mid-20s, with a rather childish face but an eager gaze, eager to show off and learn from his senior's experience. As soon as Lena Sterling came into view, O'Connell's eyes lit up unnaturally. The tiredness was gone, replaced by a look of intense interest. He nudged Riley in the ribs and jerked his chin toward Lena. "Look, Riley. See that lark?" Riley squinted in the direction O'Connell was pointing. "Who, boss?" "Oh, that black girl in the fancy dress? She looks delicious." "Your head is a feast for the eyes," O'Connell snapped, but there was a note of calculation in his voice. "Look at that. It's all designer, from the Rimowa suitcase to that Birkin. Do you know how much that bag cost? It's worth a year's salary for you and me combined." He clicked his tongue. There are only a couple of possibilities for a young, beautiful black woman who wears such expensive clothes. Either a high-class call girl who hooks up with rich men, or the mistress of some up-and-coming drug lord rewarded for some job. She's definitely hiding a bunch of dirty cash or stolen goods on her person. Riley swallowed, his eyes filled with curiosity and a hint of greed. "So, what do you mean, boss?" "I mean," O'Connell grinned, a not-so-nice grin. "We're in luck today, kid. This is a hot chick, a big opportunity. We've got to test her out, see if she's a good girl." He patted Riley on the shoulder. "Come on, act along." Riley, though he might have been a little hesitant at first about the brazenness of O'Connell's intentions, was quickly convinced by the enticement of the experienced senior, along with the prospect of making some easy money. He nodded, trying to appear confident, and together with O'Connell, they separated from the wall and began to move towards Lena Sterling, who was still walking leisurely towards the baggage claim area, completely unaware that she had fallen into the sights of two hungry wolves hiding under the cover of police uniforms. The fateful trap at the arrivals gate had begun to be set. Lena Sterling was walking through the duty-free area, her eyes quickly scanning the luxury items displayed in the glass cases, her mind still sorting through the information from her recent business trip, when two figures in police uniforms suddenly appeared right in front of her, blocking her path in a rather unexpected and impolite manner. "Hello," Officer O'Connell said first, his tone casual but not without a hint of authority. "We are airport security officers. Please stop for a moment while we conduct a random security check." The excuse of random check was too easy to come by, especially since she had just gone through the rigorous security screening process when boarding the plane. Lena frowned slightly, pausing. She looked at the two officers in front of her, the older one with a sour, disgruntled expression, the younger one looking tense but trying to act tough. Her agent instincts immediately registered something amiss in their demeanor and approach. "Random security checks?" she asked, her voice calm but her eyes piercing as she looked directly at O'Connell. "I just got off the plane and went through security at the front, officer. Is there a particular reason for this check?" She didn't look afraid, just professional alertness. O'Connell didn't seem to like being questioned. He ignored Lena's question, his eyes scanning her expensive clothes, suitcase, and especially the Birkin bag in her hand once more, his scrutiny undisguised. "This is standard procedure, ma'am. For everyone's safety. Please show your identification, passport or driver's license, and your boarding pass." His tone became more authoritative, as if he were giving orders. Riley stood a little behind O'Connell, his hands clasped behind his back, trying to look serious, but his eyes couldn't hide the curiosity as he looked at Lena and her designer goods. Lena let out a barely audible sigh. She knew that arguing now would only complicate the situation. Despite her discomfort and doubts, she decided to cooperate. She opened her Birkin bag and carefully took out her dark blue diplomatic passport and her British Airways first-class boarding pass. She handed them to O'Connell. O'Connell took the passport and turned it slowly. When he saw the words "diplomatic passport," he frowned, his eyes showing surprise and confusion for a moment. But then greed and deep-rooted prejudice quickly took over. Diplomatic passport? All the better. This type definitely had a lot to hide and was even more afraid of being made a big deal out of it. He thought to himself, "Ms. Sterling." O'Connell read the name from the passport, then looked up at Lena, his tone turning suspicious and sarcastic. "What kind of work do you do that you travel first class and wear expensive designer clothes? You don't look like a normal government employee." "My job has nothing to do with why you stopped me," Lena replied, her voice starting to cool. "I demand you give me a valid reason for this search. Otherwise, I will leave." "Where to?" Riley interjected, trying to sound tough as O'Connell instructed. "We haven't checked yet. Who knows what you're carrying in that suitcase and that bag? You look suspicious." O'Connell nodded in approval of his junior's quick wit. "That's right, Ms. Sterling. Your appearance, your luggage, your attitude, all of it makes us question you. There have been a lot of cases of illegal goods and cash being transported at this airport recently by people who appear to be unusually wealthy. We have to check carefully." He began to blatantly fabricate. "What are you implying?" Lena asked bluntly, her patience nearly exhausted. "You're suspecting me of carrying contraband just because I'm black and I dress nicely? That's racist and completely absurd." "Racist?" O'Connell sneered contemptuously. "Don't pull that card. We're just doing our jobs. If you're clean, what's there to be afraid of? Or are you hiding something?" "I have nothing to hide," Lena insisted, her voice laced with anger. "And I will not stand here for another minute of your baseless insults and interrogations. I demand to speak to your supervisor, now!" She knew her rights and did not hesitate to demand them. Lena's confidence, knowledge of the law, and request to see her superiors were the last straw for O'Connell. He felt challenged, belittled by a black woman he considered his inferior. His wounded pride, combined with a vague fear that this girl might actually know how to cause trouble, led him to make a reckless and foolish decision. "Oh, now you dare to make demands?" O'Connell growled, his face red with anger. "You are not cooperating with the police on duty, and you are being defiant. There is clearly a problem. Riley, arrest her for disturbing public order and obstructing an officer in the performance of his duty." Riley was startled by the sudden and serious order. "Arrest a woman with a diplomatic passport in the middle of the airport?" He hesitated for a moment, glancing at O'Connell and then at Lena. But O'Connell's cold eyes and meaningful nods overcame all hesitation. He was afraid of offending his senior, afraid of missing the opportunity, and was also influenced by the prejudices that O'Connell had instilled. "Miss Sterling, please come with us," Riley said, his voice shaking but trying to sound firm. He stepped closer to Lena, pulling a pair of shiny metal handcuffs from the holster at his waist. Lena froze for a moment, not out of fear, but out of disbelief at the brazenness and stupidity of these two policemen. Arresting an FBI agent with a diplomatic passport right at an international airport? Did they know what they were doing? She could easily use her self-defense skills to fight back, but she knew that would only make things worse and could endanger those around her. Moreover, it could expose her identity unnecessarily. She decided to swallow her anger, stay calm, and let them dig their own grave. When Riley reached out to grab her wrist, Lena didn't resist. She just looked straight into his eyes, a cold, deep gaze that made Riley unconsciously pull back a little. But under O'Connell's glare, he continued. Clack! The cold metal clanged as the handcuffs tightened around Lena's slender wrists. A sharp, numbing pain shot up her arms. but the physical pain was nothing compared to the humiliation boiling inside her. Handcuffed like a criminal, in the middle of a crowded airport, under hundreds of curious, pleading, pitying, and indifferent eyes. Several cell phones were raised, the lenses pointed at her, recording this shameful moment. She felt her cheeks burning with anger and humiliation. "Take her," O'Connell ordered Riley, his voice full of triumph and gloating. He eyed the Birkin in Lena's hand, which she still held tightly despite the handcuffs, with a greedy gaze. He believed his act had been a success. His prey had been completely subdued. Now all that remained was to take her into the room and extort her money. Little did he know that his fatal mistake had only just begun. Lena was escorted by Officer Riley, with Officer O'Connell following closely behind, through the crowd of curious passengers who parted on both sides. She tried to keep her back straight and her head high, showing no weakness or fear, despite the humiliation and anger that was still swirling inside her. They entered an area restricted to airport staff and security and stopped before a heavy metal door marked Security Interview Room. Riley opened the door and gently pushed Lena inside. It was a small, windowless room, painted a cold off-white and smelling strongly of disinfectant. There was only a simple metal table, a few stiff plastic chairs bolted to the floor, and a large one-way mirror that took up most of the opposite wall. The pale fluorescent lights on the ceiling added to the claustrophobic feeling. "Sit down," O'Connell ordered curtly, pointing to a chair. Lena sat down quietly, her Birkin still resting carefully on her lap. The cold metal handcuffs tightened on her wrists with every slight movement. O'Connell sat down in the chair opposite, propping his feet up on the table. Riley leaned against the wall near the door, arms folded, acting as a silent escort. O'Connell began his threatening act, his tone patronizing and patronizing. "Now, Miss Sterling, diplomatic. No one is bothering us anymore. You know, your situation is pretty bad." He smirked. "Arrested for disturbing the peace, resisting arrest at an international airport, not to mention suspicions of smuggling contraband or dirty money. Your unusually wealthy appearance is a red flag." He continued to list a series of dire consequences if the case was handled according to proper procedures. "You will be detained for at least 48 hours for investigation. We will thoroughly search all of your luggage. Information about this arrest may leak to the press. Imagine, arrested at Miami airport on suspicion of drug and money laundering. Your reputation, your career, are gone, not to mention the trouble with your management agency. What will they think of a diplomatic employee getting caught up in the law like this?" He deliberately emphasized sensitive points, hoping to appeal to Lena's fear of losing face and losing her career. Riley stood beside her, nodding occasionally, his cold eyes looking at Lena, creating more psychological pressure. Having painted a dark picture enough to frighten his victim, O'Connell moved into the main event, his tone suddenly becoming artificially softer. "However," he said, leaning forward, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret, "you don't seem like the hardened criminal type. Perhaps you're just a little ignorant of the rules here, or just a little short-tempered. We lawmakers have to be humane sometimes, don't we, Riley?" He glanced at Riley, who nodded mechanically. "Look, Ms. Sterling," O'Connell continued, "we can get you out of this mess gracefully. We can forget your initial suspicions, overlook your uncooperative behavior, and just write up a brief public order notice. You can leave immediately, as if nothing had happened." He paused, looking Lena straight in the eye, waiting for a reaction. "Of course, that requires you to demonstrate some real repentance and reasonableness." "How practical?" Lena asked, her voice remaining strangely calm, which surprised O'Connell a little, but he assumed was because she was trying to sound tough. "Well," O'Connell rubbed his hands together, a greedy smile on his face, "a little compensation for our hard work and goodwill. Consider it a settling fee to smooth things over. Given your status and financial means, I don't think the figure is a problem." He held up 5 fingers, then closed them again. $5,000, cash, now and you're free. $5,000. It was no small sum, offered so brazenly and confidently. O'Connell and Riley were sure that with the pressure and fear they had created and their perceived wealth, Lena would not hesitate to spend that amount of money to escape. But they were dead wrong. Lena Sterling had heard enough, seen enough. Their act had provided ample evidence of the crime. It was time to bring the curtain down. She looked straight into O'Connell's eyes, no longer afraid or hesitant. A cold, almost imperceptible smile played across her lips. $5,000 to ignore your own crimes? Her voice was suddenly sharp, full of sarcasm. I think you're the ones in big trouble, officers. O'Connell and Riley were stunned by this sudden change in attitude. What did you say? O'Connell stammered. I say, Lena continued, her voice now filled with unmistakable authority, that you have just committed a series of serious crimes, including unlawful detention, abuse of power, insult to honor, and extortion of a United States citizen, the person you were supposed to protect. And you did it to a federal agent. Federal agent? Riley blurted, his face white. Yes, Lena insisted. I request permission to make a prescribed phone call, now. This time, her request was no longer hesitant, but an order. O'Connell and Riley looked at each other, confusion and a vague fear starting to invade their minds. Federal agent? No way. This girl is just trying to scare me. O'Connell tried to reassure himself, but Lena's confident voice and unwavering gaze made him feel genuinely uneasy. Still, he tried to act tough. Call? Fine. Call. Get your best lawyer here. Let's see who's in trouble. He pointed to the landline on the table. He still believed he had the situation under control, that this was just the last resort of his desperate prey. Lena stood up calmly and walked over to the phone. Her hands were still cuffed behind her back, making it difficult for her, but she dialed the number firmly. It wasn't her lawyer's or a relative's number. It was a special number, a direct encrypted line to the FBI's Miami field office and Washington, D.C. headquarters. The other end of the line picked up almost immediately. No greeting, just silence waiting for a signal. Lena put the receiver to her ear, her voice clear, professional, without a trace of trembling. This is Agent Sterling, badge number 7492, reporting a code blue emergency. I am currently being held without warrant at Security Room 4, Arrivals Area D, Miami International Airport. Subjects are 2 airport security police officers, Officer David O'Connell and Officer Kevin Riley. Request immediate activation of Emergency Support Procedure Number 3. Repeat, requesting Procedure Number 3. She finished speaking and calmly put the receiver down. The entire call took less than 20 seconds. O'Connell and Riley stood frozen. They heard every word. Agent Sterling, badge, FBI, code blue emergency, procedure 3. The jargon couldn't be faked. A chill ran down their spines. The vague fear they'd felt earlier had turned to pure terror. What had they done? Had they actually captured and attempted to blackmail an FBI agent on duty? Less than 2 minutes after Lena's call, the landline phone in the security room rang loudly, the sound as piercing as a death knell. At the same time, there was the sound of hurried footsteps and hurried talking in the hallway. The door to the room was flung open with force. Lieutenant Anya Sharma, the female supervisor on duty at the airport security department, rushed into the room, her face pale, her eyes filled with panic and extreme anger. She had just received an urgent call from her superiors, along with direct instructions from the local FBI director's office. O'Connell! Riley! What the hell have you two done? Lieutenant Sharma shouted, his voice cracking with shock. Let her go right now! Take the handcuffs off now! At the same time, two men in plain clothes with strong looks and cold eyes quickly entered the room. They needed no introduction, but the aura and professionalism they exuded made it clear who they were. They were FBI agents from the local rapid response team. O'Connell and Riley stood there, paralyzed with fear and shock. It had all happened so fast, so horribly. One of the FBI agents walked over to Lena, pulled out a special key, and gently released her handcuffs. "Are you okay, Agent Sterling?" he asked, his voice full of respect. Lena rubbed her red wrists and stood up straight. She calmly took her passport and boarding pass from Lieutenant Sharma's trembling hands. Then she turned around, facing O'Connell and Riley, who now looked incredibly small and pathetic. She raised her FBI badge again, her voice cold as ice. "I warned you. You made a fatal mistake." The truth was out. The blackmail plot had ended in a stunning reversal. And for O'Connell and Riley, their worst nightmare had only just begun. The downfall of Officer David O'Connell and Officer Kevin Riley was swift and irreversible. Faced with the horrific truth that they had wrongfully detained, insulted, and attempted to blackmail a federal agent, the two men who had once appeared so arrogant and powerful now completely collapsed. Their faces were white, they were sweating profusely, and their bodies were shaking uncontrollably. They were no longer able to speak or think coherently, but stood there like living statues, awaiting their fate. Lieutenant Anya Sharma, after her initial shock and anger, quickly regained her professional supervisory demeanor. As the FBI agents looked on, she sternly announced the immediate suspension of O'Connell and Riley. "Turn over your weapons, badges, and identification cards immediately!" Her voice was stern, without hesitation. The two criminals obeyed silently, their hands shaking as they removed the symbols of power they had shamefully abused. O'Connell and Riley were then escorted out of the secure room by FBI agents and taken to the FBI's Miami field office for formal questioning. They would face a serious federal criminal investigation. The incident caused a stir not only within the MIA Airport Security Department, but also throughout the entire city police department and the federal law enforcement system. The reputation of the local police force was severely damaged. A large-scale internal investigation was urgently conducted in parallel with the FBI investigation to clarify the extent of the violations, search for potential accomplices, and review the entire working process as well as supervision at the Airport Security Department. For O'Connell and Riley, the legal road ahead is bleak. Agent Lena Sterling's detailed testimony, backed up by airport security camera evidence, which clearly captured the stop, handcuffs, and escort, and other data, has created an irrefutable case. Their defense attorneys have little basis for arguing their innocence. They were charged in federal court with a series of serious crimes: unlawful detention under color of law, extortion under color of law, violation of federal civil rights protected by the Constitution, and conspiracy to commit a crime. The racial motive was emphasized by federal prosecutors throughout the proceedings, showing that their actions were motivated not only by greed, but also by hostile, malicious prejudice. Faced with the prospect of receiving a hefty sentence if convicted after a full trial, O'Connell and Riley ultimately opted to accept a plea deal, admitting their wrongdoing in exchange for a more lenient sentence. At the sentencing hearing, the federal judge did not hesitate to harshly criticize the two defendants' actions, calling it a blatant betrayal of their oath to serve and protect the people, a stain that will never be erased from the image of true law enforcement officers. "You not only violated the law," the judge said, "but also abused the power and trust that society placed in you to commit crimes based on despicable racial prejudices. Your actions not only harmed the direct victims, but also eroded the community's faith in the justice system." The final verdict was 6 years in federal prison for each. Although less than the maximum sentence they could have received, 6 years in prison was still a severe punishment, enough to deter and demonstrate the law's zero tolerance for abuse of power, corruption, and racism in the police force. Of course, O'Connell and Riley were also permanently fired from the police force, losing all rights, honor, and future prospects. Their fatal mistake at the gate had come at a terrible price. A few days after the incident, Agent Lena Sterling left Miami and continued her work. Although the experience of being arrested and harassed at the airport was an unwanted and emotionally difficult incident, with the courage of a seasoned agent, she did not let it affect her spirit and work too much. For her, it was just another reminder of the harsh realities that she and many other African Americans still face every day, even when they have achieved high positions in society or hold important positions. The case also revealed a sad truth about the persistence of racial prejudice and the potential for corruption within the very system designed to protect justice. It reinforced Lena's determination to carry out her mission, not only to investigate and arrest financial criminals, but also to contribute to the larger fight to clean up the public administration and fight against injustice and discrimination in all its forms. Sitting on the next flight, looking out the window at the cities stretching below, Lena Sterling reflected on the path she had chosen. A path filled with challenges, dangers, and moments of confronting the darkest side of human nature. But it was also a path that gave her the opportunity to make a difference, to protect the vulnerable, to contribute to building a fairer and better society. Her eyes became steadfast, strong. Although she knew the fight was long and difficult, she would never back down. She would continue to fight, with the intelligence, courage, and integrity of a true federal agent. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this story. If you like this content, please click like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next meaningful stories, because tomorrow we will have another meaningful story for you.